Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Parissis. What I'd like to do today is take a shot at predicting how much hair you might lose. So let's say you're worried about hair loss and you've lost lots of hair and you're worried that you're going to lose more hair. Or let's say you are one of those people who has lost some hair and you're worried about losing more hair. Or let's say you haven't lost any hair at all, but you're still worried about losing hair. And there are people who have literally not lost a hair on their head, but they're very worried that they will, because hair loss is very, very common. I thought it might be useful to discuss whether we can predict how much hair someone might lose, whether they've lost lots of hair already or whether they haven't lost any hair at all. This could be useful for you, for example, if you're deciding whether or not to start a preventative medication such as finasteride, if you're sort of umming and ahhing about whether to start them, since of course preventing hair loss is always better than making up for hair loss once it's happened. But there are currently a few ways of predicting how severe someone will experience male pattern baldness. The first one being genetic testing. Genetic testing for male pattern baldness has been around for a while. This particular paper is an excellent study done recently which has identified a number of genetic markers in the DNA linked to male pattern baldness. And we can use these genetic markers to predict the severity of male pattern baldness in a sample of someone's DNA. And one way of doing that yourself is to get a tricho test, which looks at some of the genetic markers linked to male pattern baldness and gives you quite an accurate prediction of how much hair you might lose in the future. However, it can be quite expensive. Another method that this particular paper outlines with respect to predicting male pattern baldness severity is to use trichoscopy, which is essentially looking at the hair follicles under a microscope and evaluating whether they are vellus hairs, intermediate hairs or terminal hairs. And if there's a greater percentage of vellus hairs or intermediate hairs, then that might indicate that that area of the scalp is more likely to undergo hair loss than other areas. So if there's a greater percentage of vellus hairs and intermediate hairs, then we can say that that patient is more likely to experience hair loss in that region. However, the only disadvantage with this method is that you need to have an in-person consultation. You need to have a proper examination of your hair follicles under a trichoscope. So I thought what I'd do is try and predict how much hair you might lose in the future right now, without needing a consultation, without needing to spend a lot of money on genetic testing. Now, this model is definitely not as accurate as genetic testing, but it does make a good attempt at predicting how severe your male pattern baldness might unfold. And I have created this model using our experience of seeing hundreds of patients with male pattern baldness and seeing how those patients have progressed. And I have used how they progressed to create this predictive model. So this model suggests how likely you are to reach a Norwood 6 on the Norwood classification scale. Step 1, I want you to look in the mirror and I want you to be brutally honest with yourself and I want you to classify yourself on this Norwood scale. Be honest with yourself because otherwise this won't work. Now I want you to remember where you think you fit on that scale and I want you to think about how old you are. Next, what I want you to do is answer yes or no to the following questions I'm going to ask you. Question number 1. Are you 30 years old and have you experienced significant crown loss? Are you under the age of 30 and have you graded yourself a Norwood 4 or more? No matter your age, have you graded yourself a Norwood 5 or more? If you have answered yes to any of those previous 3 questions, then you're highly likely to reach a Norwood 6. Let's continue. Are you under the age of 30 and have you experienced some crown loss? What I mean by this is you can see there's visible thinning of your crown region, but you can't yet see large areas of visible scalp. Are you under the age of 30 and have you graded yourself a Norwood 3? No matter your age, have you graded yourself a Norwood 4? If you've answered yes to any of those previous 3 questions, then you are likely to reach a Norwood 6. Are you between the age of 30 and 40 years old and have you graded yourself a Norwood 3? If you have said yes to this question, then this model is not brilliant at predicting how much hair you'll lose in the future. And it will depend on a thorough history to look at your family history of male pattern baldness, as well as whether you've lost hair in the crown. And it'll also depend on an examination, ideally looking at your hair through a trichoscope to see if there are any miniaturizing hairs. So if you're one of these patients, we can best predict how your male pattern baldness will progress with a consultation here. So let's move on. Are you between the age of 25 to 30 and have you graded yourself a Norwood 1? Are you between the age of 30 and 40 and have you graded yourself a Norwood 2? Are you the age of 40 or more and have you graded yourself a Norwood 3? If you have answered yes to any of the previous 3 questions, then you're unlikely to reach a Norwood 6. My next question is, are you between the age of 30 and 40 and have you graded yourself a Norwood 1? Are you above 40 years old and have you graded yourself a Norwood 2? If you've answered yes to any of the previous two questions, then you are highly unlikely to reach a Norwood 6. And finally, are you 40 years old or more and have you graded yourself a Norwood 1? If you have answered yes to this question, then you're almost certain to not reach a Norwood 6. The reason why I say almost certain is because we can never be 100% certain. Male pattern baldness is quite unpredictable, and so we can never say for sure that you will not reach a Norwood 6. So which category do you fit in? I have summarized the categories here if you'd like to double check where you fit in. I know it can be difficult sometimes to actually grade yourself. That's why having a proper examination and a proper consultation, it's going to be much more beneficial to you if you are concerned about how much hair you might lose down the line. I did want to say that no matter where you've classified yourself, there are always treatment options for everyone in any classification. Patients who are younger may benefit more from preventative medications such as finasteride and minoxidil. That would be to stabilize hair loss, and we could use hair transplant surgery to make up for any loss that you're concerned about. So this model generally suggests how likely you are to reach a Norwood 6. For Norwood 7 patients, which are much more rare than Norwood 6 patients, they can be more challenging to treat, and generally hair transplant surgery is the best way to do this. They've lost so much hair that there is no more hair loss to actually stabilize, and I'm very excited to discuss a particular case of a Norwood 7 patient in an upcoming video with Dr. Bloxham. I hope this was useful for you guys. And again, I'm Dr. Parissis. I work in London, UK. If you'd like to reach out to me on my email at drparissis@gmail.com, or you'd like to make an inquiry for a consultation, you can submit an inquiry at fellermedical.com.